slightly disorienting to be sitting next to Jeanine Tesori and George Brant. These are both people who I love deeply, who I've known for a long time, who I've worked with intensively, and I have never seen them together until 2 minutes ago. So watching them together is a sort of kaleidoscopic version of my life, which you should be interested in. I don't think so. But let's start with Grounded, the play, because that's where this enterprise started. And George, could you talk a little bit about just why you wrote Grounded, where the inspiration come from, and perhaps even just a little about Grounded for those who haven't memorized it?
Sure, of course. What a few people are out there who haven't. So this, let's see, I think in 2011 was when I first wrote the first draft of the play. And I was interested in drones. They were a top secret program at that time, and but we knew they were being used. But it seemed like being told to not look too closely at them and just accept that they're doing a great job. They're keeping our pilots out of danger and are very precise weapons of war. And so I wanted to know more about them, and then that led into my eternal question of, is there a play here? And then, but it wasn't until I started reading about the pilots and what they go through that I thought that there could be a play. Learning specifically about how this is one of the first instances of war where they actually went to enact war for 12 hours a day and then went home at night. They weren't stationed overseas, they were stationed in Las Vegas and flew these drones thousands of miles away with only a second delay. And that was just so mind-blowing because I had assumed, and still don't quite accept it as truth and not science fiction, but I thought they'd have to be in country where they flew them. And then that led me to thinking, along with discovering Stars and Stripes, which is an in-house military publication. One of the few things I was able to find was an article in their magazine online that mentioned that the pilots were having the same PTSD rates as fighter pilots. The pilots flying these drones. So all of those questions and this idea of how much can you compartmentalize something, can you separate home and work or war that much, and all that was interesting to me. That this idea of how do you be a productive member of a family if you can't talk about what you did all day.
Because it's classified.
Exactly. All those things were really interesting to me. So, and then to a quick summary then from there. So basically the play, it was a one-woman play about a woman who's a fighter pilot at the top of her league, and then unexpectedly meets someone, falls in love, and then unexpectedly gets pregnant from that encounter, and then has to drop out of the military for that reason, and then wants to re-enlist but gets assigned to flying drones instead, and has to make that mental adjustment.
Did you interview pilots, or did you have personal contact with them as part of the research for the play?
I didn't interview them while writing it. There came a time when we had one of the first public readings that I think it was Matt Smart, the playwright, attended it. He's like, hey, I got a guy if you want to get it vetted by somebody in the military who had vetted one of his plays. So I took a deep breath and sent it to this. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who actually did kind of oversee the drones to a certain extent. And he took a look at it, and then I even more held my breath waiting to hear what he thought of it. And then he called me and we had a conversation, which thankfully was a positive one. And he was a nice guy. He was like, yeah, you know, I did plays in high school, and so I know where you're coming from here. So he kind of kept giving me an artistic allowance, which I very much appreciated and did not expect from a member of the military. So he's like, I know this probably works better the way you have it, but just so you know, this is actually how it is. So he had a lot of that.
And did you respond to that? Did the play
Yeah,
change?
definitely. There were some key things that what did I think they could do? I thought they could hover. And he's like, yeah, they don't hover, they orbit. He's like, they can't actually just sit there, they need to circle. Which,
Basic
you know,
aerodynamics,
became like kind of a major part of
Sharp saw 7, right on that, I know that.
yeah, so orbiting and all that became, something that I liked better than hovering. So that was one of the good things. I don't know if I was quite as aware of where the cameras were exactly. So they are kind of on the belly of the vehicle. But he was a great guy. But he would read. he was like, okay, then there's this part. And he'd read like a page and a half, 2 pages. He'd keep going, just reading it to me over the phone, and I didn't know where it was going. And then he'd be like, I mean, that's just great. So I'm like, all right.
That's a good place for it
Yes.
to go. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel.
So yes, and he actually did see it here at the public, and enjoyed it very much.
He was
I will put
auditioning.
in that plug, right?
That's why he read so much. He wanted
Might
the
have
part.
been. Yes, he might have been. I believe he's now a commercial airline pilot, and I think he had stopped over in New York and came and saw it here.
It's a spectacular play, and it's not a memento mori, it's still a spectacular play, it's not past tense. But one of the things, it's going home at night, but the other thing that's so powerful in it is the idea of going to war without being in any physical danger yourself, no reciprocal danger, and therefore war becoming a kind of punch-the-clock work that isn't actually the extraordinary out of normative life event that we have always thought of as war. And the play is so brilliant at capturing that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that's something that we've held on to in the opera as well. But this idea that you're not threatened and there is no danger to you is I think was noted as part of the psychological challenge actually of being one of these pilots, to kind of feel like, oh, no one can hurt me, but I can hurt them. It just changes the equation completely and becomes something not quite war perhaps, or so it just moves into this other realm.
And part of what I loved about both the play and the opera is that you're really rigorous about keeping that point of view. You don't get into a political analysis or overview. You really stay with her point of view and her perspective and the personal and psychological, which ends up having very powerful political impact on reading.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary piece. We were lucky enough to do it on this stage in 2015 in a gorgeous production. I'm sorry, Alexa probably told you this, but I couldn't hear her backstage, with Anne Hathaway, directed by Julie Taymor, and it was a just gorgeous, gorgeous piece. Which then got our beloved colleague and friend Jeanine Tesori involved in making an opera. How did that happen? How did that start? Who had that idea?
I'm dying for someone to say, if the military guy who's like, yeah, I did plays in high school, and I want to say, yeah, I flew planes in high school, and then reciprocate. How did it happen? I went to see the play, and I saw it here, but before that I saw it in DC, in a beautiful production at Studio. And Paul, I had gotten a commission, and I couldn't find the right project, because I didn't want to write something where women were like parsley. I really wanted to write where women had agency. And then there was this woman in a box in this play, and all I thought was, oh my God, that is, it's this woman surrounded by men everywhere. Oh, that's like music, right? And I started hearing everything, and then, so Paul and I were together, and they had already contacted George about, because it was Paul Cremo's idea, and I signed on. I knew it would be hard, because we talk about this all the time. You want to honor the source material and also betray it. And that usually takes, our out of town was, we had one foot in honoring the play and one foot in betraying it. And now I feel like with the rewrites that we've done, that we've really hopefully made this opera its own thing that honors the source material.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I've had the great good fortune of being around you, watching you work, and one of the striking things about you, Jeanine, is you have worked with so many strong writers and figured out how to make dramaturgical music with them that illuminates the ideas and feelings of the play. It's really an extraordinary gift.
Well, the playwrights, I want to, I went into this business not to make money, clearly.
You succeeded!
Yes, my mom is like right there with me. But I want to work with great playwrights. I want to be better. I want to work with a tennis partner who makes my shots better. And also, this is the second time, with Tony doing Caroline, and then David Lindsay-Avera doing Kimberly, and now with George, that they're adapting. They understand, I think, so much very quickly, because musicals and operas, you have to think about the sound of words, not just. It's just impossible what you do. Mine is slightly more possible. You have to think like, oh, if that's a closed vowel, it won't sing as well, and if it's there, and if you hold that. If it's exposition, it won't be, you have to dramatize, you have to show, don't tell. So it's just like bourbon. It's just really, there's a reason why Steve Sondheim was a great puzzle maker and puzzle follower, because it is a gigantic puzzle, and if you're not careful, the whole thing ends up like a tipped over Jenga game.
So we're about to elevate the entire tone of this evening. Although before we jump to that, I just really want to underline the shout out to Paul Cremo, really an extraordinary human being.
Yeah.
The Metropolitan Opera is very lucky to have him. But now we get to do something that I never get to do, not kicking over water bottles, which I do all the time. We are going to welcome the brilliant actress Mary Jensen to read from the beginning of the play, and then the mezzo-soprano Emily D'Angelo with Caitlin Trantorell at the piano to sing the equivalent part of the opera. And please welcome them on stage.
I never wanted to take it off. Staring at myself in the mirror, myself in this. I had earned this. This was me now. This was who I was now. I've become through sweat and brains and guts. This is me. It's more than a suit. It's the speed. It's the G-force pressing you back as you tear the sky. It's the ride of my tiger, my gal, who cradles me, lifts me up. It's more. It's the respect. It's the danger. It's more. It's you are the blue. You are alone in the vastness, and you are the blue. Astronauts, they have eternity, but I have color. I have blue.
Wow, that's a really good idea.
Opera singers are, honestly, they're rugby players. They're like arts and letters NFL. That's how I think of them. And I just want to say, shout out and respect to people who can absolutely sing like that over an 80-piece orchestra. I don't understand it. I just super respect to it.
It's just also so beautiful. It's so beautiful to hear that translation from the words to the words of the music.
I was very nervous, actually.
You were nervous now?
Well, yeah, because that's the first time I read the play many, many times, but I haven't read the play in a very long time. And on the way out here, I said to George, I hope we didn't ruin the play. Because it's, you know, when you read the source material against it, it's like, oh, I just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. But right now, as a theater guy, I feel really, really small. I feel like, can't we do that all the time? You know, I mean, I'm sure over an 80-piece orchestra is great, but wouldn't it be beautiful in here with this intimacy?
Well, yes, and let's make our announcement about opera next season for the Answacker. Nothing, he didn't.
No, we're not ready to make that announcement. These days, I have to get the budget done first. You know, I just couldn't help thinking you also wrote another beautiful opera called Blue. Just an association. So listen, you get really interested. Paul Creamer has this idea. You guys get connected. You get interested. Then what happens when you sit down and start talking? Because the working process. I mean, we're gonna a little bit later. We'll talk about some of the really big changes that happen. But just how do you start working on this together?
Well, it's a path. It's how we start working on anything. You know, you start blocking something out. I mean, I have a very particular method now, which involves, I should have stock in Staples. I use so many office supplies. And this giant dry erase board. And then when I was up at McDowell, I put a lot of things, which I then draw and make little sculptures of, because that's how, I got an A in calculus and a D in geometry, and that's how my brain absolutely works. Because I have to be able to see it, and I have to be able to stage it in my head, even if it's different. And so then I put these, we would talk through the major events and choices, and where the exposition, the mise en scène, all of that, and then at the end, and then I put these index cards, and then I filmed them, and then I would just watch it. It's a very strange process.
And so that you're putting stuff. inspired by Emily if she doesn't need a microphone. So you're talking to George, you're putting those beats up, but then you guys at some point are actually sitting together. And how does that back and forth work?
Yes, George.
Yeah. Well, I was just remembering that the old pandemic came in the middle of part of this when it would have been a little more shoulder to shoulder, and so there was more, kind of more Zoom to Zooming going on than either of us would have liked.
Weirdly appropriate for a play
But
about
weirdly
drums,
appropriate,
yeah.
exactly. It wasn't completely off base. But I remember at the very start, Paul was sending me some, classic opera libretto to look at, just to see, and mainly to kind of get the word count, because some of those have so few words in them. And I thought when we began, I was like, oh, this is kind of a short play, it'll probably be fine, the way it is. And then I was like, oh wow, it's already too long, and so that was the beginning of my eyes being opened to the amount of editing that was going to have to be done. But it's more than, it became much more than cutting it down. As you even heard from that little excerpt, it's kind of a different animal.
It became so much more than cutting it down. This tight, taut, one-woman show is no longer a one-person show. There's a number of characters who show up as well. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about her husband, who we're going to hear from in just a second. And what's the moment when you say, there's going to be more people here?
Well, right at the beginning, because a lot of people asked me in the beginning, is this going to be for a solo woman? And I knew it was going to be a mezzo, and I knew it was going to be, I met Emily when she was 24, and she walked in, and I thought, oh, it's you. There's just a moment where I just think, oh, it's you. And I did not, I'd heard her sing recordings and all that, but I just knew as soon as she sat down, I thought, oh, it's you. And so I wrote that, and it turns out I was writing for Ben in my head, because Ben is so close to this character. I adore working with him. He's super real. He had a beer before he came out to sing. But it's like, that's the kind of people you want to not say, the opera is up here. It's simply not. It's a tessitura that it goes up and it goes down, but it is absolutely the scale of human behavior and what we feel is epic. I raised a teenager, they're very epic. And I feel like that it raises the roof in a way that is sort of inexplicable. And one of the things we wanted to do is you have to figure out what the population is. And that's true for musicals. How many people are in it? Oh, it's 10 people? Oh, there's 80 people who are, and even for the orchestra, I cast them all. I made a picture of the orchestra and the way that they would be in conversation for the orchestration. Because people don't really understand, you have to cast, people have to play it, and they have to be interested being a player. There was nothing worse than when you play that, and then you wait, and then you play mom. But, they're also characters. And so when we were doing Eric, they didn't have names. In your play, it's pilot. And so Jess and Eric, and the idea that Eric was of the ground, and it was George's idea to make him a rancher. And Ben is very much like that from Kansas. And she's up in the sky, which is where I live. And I feel like that's Midwest and Long Island, right? And also the journey that he takes on, as so many vets who have classified information, they suffer because they don't know what their spouses are going through. They're not allowed to know. And their spouses are being melon-balled out, gutted by this information they can't share. And he is also then transferred as a spouse to Las Vegas, where he becomes a blackjack dealer, and he's a rancher. And then he's wearing a red spangly vest. And I talked to this guy who was a blackjack dealer, and he was telling me about what the graveyard shift is and how hard it is because people blame you for losing money. And so that's what we have discussions like that.
One of the beautiful things is, back in the original play, is that as a blackjack dealer, he's always being watched by the camera in the sky, and he knows that his moves are being scrutinized exactly the way his wife is scrutinized. And somehow that particular kind of alienation and distancing is happening in Vegas. It's terribly resonant. just to get a sense of what happens when you open up this story, could I please welcome the tenor Ben Bliss, who Jeanine was just referring to.
I can see a storm 20 miles away. A horse that's about to bolt. I didn't see you coming. I know how to read cattle, to keep the fences tight, but I didn't see you coming. No, I didn't see you coming. I ride, and every time I ride, my eyes just glare on the horizon line, blind to what's right in front of me. Till now I'm where my boots are. I can feel it. Samantha, I do. I'm finally planted on the ground. I can feel it, my fly girls, I do. A wonderful surprise. I didn't see what was coming.
That was fantastic. I mean, you know, it's so interesting because in the play, you only see him through her eyes.
Right.
And to then hear him from his own perspective, from his own voice, is really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's,
That's not the opposite.
but now we have these two people who are fully fleshed characters, and the portrait of marriage, both in the play and the opera, is nuanced and very upsetting and beautiful at the same time. But you also have a bunch of other characters in this opera. And can you talk a little bit about, I mean, probably it's worth describing them a little bit, so those, but also where the idea of doing all that came from, because it really, that's where the play starts getting blown open in my mind.
So we have the role of the commander. You want to talk about it?
Sure, yeah. The commander, a lot of the principal singers are mentioned, at least mentioned in the play somewhere, whether they've got big scenes or anything. So there's the commander, her daughter, their daughter Sam, who is sung about in that last aria, and makes her grand entrance during it, and is a delight. And then We had one character that we ended up cutting, and then who am I forgetting? And then there's also someone we're going to hear from later this evening. Yes, there's a censor that she works with in the trailer. It's kind of a two-person job flying these drones. And then one of our big additions was what we call also jazz, which I don't know if you want to talk about this, Jean, but part of the idea was that, often in trauma, people see themselves from above when they're involved with something that they're having, problems mentally fully acknowledging and so this was an idea that Jeanine had to open the character up a little more and to make manifest this concept.
Could you talk about that a little bit, Jim?
I was up at McDowell right before the Broadway was closed, so it was February, March. And I was, up in New Hampshire, and it was, I would say, it's beautiful, but it's a little bleak. So I had a lot of time to think. And I was very in love with the idea that it was one woman in a sea of men, so that she would be the only one literally singing in treble clef, like that she owned the sky, metaphorically, of the music, and everybody else was down below. And then when I was thinking about, I've spent a lot of time thinking about trauma and working on trauma, and one of the things when we were talking about it, I thought, it should be for two women, because she almost becomes two women. She actually can psychologically hover. She doesn't have to orbit, she can hover above herself, because when we are trauma, and I had thought about it a lot, and read a lot, and interviewed a lot of people about it. Disassociation is different, but there's a splitting off, so that you have a hard drive and I realized it's like she has her own drone. And if you can't integrate these events, these horrible events into memory, you have a separate part of yourself that's simply, and I learned a lot from working with Alison Bechtel, and she always talked about this in Fun Home, that she was simply disaffected. So she would say, my father got hit by a truck. And I was like, that's how I talk about our family history of trauma, is like, you report it, there is nothing behind it because you can't access it. It's somewhere over there. And so there's a point where also Jess, who's played by a beautiful singer, you will hear, separates, they hold a note and they split it. She goes all the way up and Emily goes all the way down, and then she becomes, it's almost like a cell when it's falling apart. And that occurred to me in one moment. I called George, and George was like, let's try it. So it stayed.
It's remarkably effective. It's one of the ways, again, it feels like the opera form allows things to be embodied, that in the realistic theater form, we gather all from the actor. It's inside the actor and we feel it, but we get to actually watch it manifest, which I'd say also I found extremely powerful, the idea of the Killchain. And I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about that, because that's, again, talked about in the play, but it actually exists in the opera.
Yeah, so one idea we had was whenever she puts on her headset, there's all these voices in her head, and this is true in reality as well, that
real voices.
Yes, that a drone pilot is being advised by people all around the world who are watching what she's watching and are patched in, but they're not in the room with her. They're could be each in a different corner of the world. So they'll have lawyers on there, sometimes priests, and then sometimes the president, sometimes the vice president, will be watching this feed. So they are getting a lot of input into their activity. So we were talking about that and whether that could be included, and I can't remember, which is probably a good sign, I can't remember whose idea it was at this point, but that should be made manifest in some way, that this idea of this kill chain that lives in her headphones. Yes, and Jeanine did a masterful and quite a thorough examination of these horrifying transcripts of some of these drone attacks gone wrong, and that language you really embed it into the score.
Yeah, there are thousands of pages that George helped me with the research, and one of the most, I mean, there's so much that's upsetting about it. The inevitability of war is something else, and how one feels about the politics, but this idea of how war is waged, and the innocents who are on the collateral doesn't cover it, but also the people who are really asked to just do something and not question it. And she ends up being incarcerated for defying orders. But this language and the way that it would break up, you know, and it's like, I guess this, I think this, and they use all of this military language. And when we did something with one of the pilots, and she was using those language like, well, the MVP of the LBJ of the IRT, I was like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're saying. I know it musically when I'm, you know, I can easily use nomenclature to distance myself, but it's all abbreviations and
Military age male.
yes, yeah, to almost distance you from what you're doing, and so the Killchain is in a box off stage, mic'd, and I wanted to use amplification in an opera house. It's very tricky because they're analog and they are coming through speakers and what we did, Paul Nerhefren did the sound design, is along the opera, the speakers are on either side, so it's like the opera house has headsets on. It's super cool what she did.
We're going to get to listen to this right now. Once again, we're going to do a side-by-side of the play. Merritt is going to read a piece of the play, and then we're going to be lucky enough to have Ben and Emily with Caitlin sing the equivalent part of the opera, and this is Clap Off the Game. So George, could you set this up?
So this, in both forms, this is a moment where Eric, her husband, notices that she's having some trouble. Basically, you know, she's staring into space, and he notices this, and notices there's some trouble going on. So he offers a way that she might be able to psychologically walk away from what she's been doing all day.
It's hard to go home tonight. The desert isn't long. I still see bodies in my head. I orbit our block a few times. Hope Eric isn't looking out the window. Then I pull up, and the door opens, and the happy family greets their hero home from the war. Every day, every day, every day they greet me home from the war. It would be a different book, The Odyssey, if Odysseus came home every day, every single day. Very different book. We're having dinner. Eric waves his hand in front of my face, says, "Hey, hello, honey. You gotta clap off the game." I say, "Clap off what?" He says, "Clap off the game. Blackjack. The end of my ship. To let it know I've got no tricks up my sleeve, but it's for me too. I clap and I'm done. I leave the table and I'm done for the day." I say, "Good for you." He says, "You should make up your own." A dealer makes up his own. I tell him to shut the fuck up. But I do try it. I do. Next day after day of bread. But it doesn't. I sit in the driveway, doing it in the driveway, but it doesn't. I can't go in yet. I don't know why. I imagine them inside. I try to see them. Close my eyes. Get a thermal reading. Sam is in her bed. Eric's on her couch. I am in the car.
Hey, Jess, you gotta clap off the game.
What?
Clap off the game, blackjack. The end of my shift. No chips up my sleeve. It's for the cameras, but it's good for me too. I clap and I'm done. I clap and makes up his own. So come on, let's see it. Let's see what you got.
You know what, Eric? It would be a different book, The Odyssey. If Odysseus came home every day, every single day, a very different book, a very different book.
This is spectacularly interesting. It's
really unnerving.
Such a good time.
Well, also, right after that, we wrote something for Eric where it's also tied, so also bringing little pieces of the opera that we've been running is like, what happens next? What does happen? I don't remember, but that's why in that spot, he actually expresses how frustrating it is, you know, like he can't reach her and it's all classified. And
but it does that. I know it's an old-fashioned thing to say, but that opera does, which is it just elevates it. It makes it large in a way that is appealing. You made a really dramatic change in the story in terms of the framing and where the story ends. And I don't want to do necessarily spoiler alerts, but if you could figure out how not to spoil the ending, and yet talk in intimate detail about one of the things that occurred to me, I will say, is yes, it's also translating from the play to opera, but it's also over a decade after you originally started working on this. The world has changed a lot, and it felt very satisfying to read the difference in what happens in the narrative now. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all, or
well, the end was just a bummer, honestly.
the original.
Not just in the original, but for the opera, there was something about it, and I don't mean that like, oh, it's a bummer. I mean, like, really, Tony once said this to me a really long time ago, and I know you'll remember that there is a moral imperative of hope at the end of musicals and operas. You just can't flatten people. It was when we were doing Caroline or Change, it's like Emmy is going to work on the Obama campaign. That's what she's going to do. So while her mother goes deeper underwater, her daughter rises. And one of the things that George and I really talked about, besides the framing device, was this idea that we originally in the opera, she was Cassandra. She was like, and you're next. And we were like, that, we can't do it. You can't recover from that. What we decided to do for her was to allow her to sing that at her moral freedom, and where she is most morally free, she is incarcerated. So in the story, she is free, and in the plot, she's behind bars. And that freedom allows her to truly clap off something that because she does the right thing. Freedom is the moral equivalence for her of getting in good trouble. And that was really important. And it took us a long time, I think both of us, with Michael Mayer to figure out the form with which that we did that, which I won't discuss, but the children out there, maybe because I'm Italian, everybody raises everybody else's kid. You hang out a window, you're like, stop doing that to your brother. You're not my mother. Yes, everybody is your mother. It's the idea that they're all our kids, everyone. And so in terms of the beginning of it, do you want to discuss?
The beginning of what?
opera.
At the beginning of the opera. Oh, that. Oh, yes. That whole thing. No, well, yeah, we this is in between, we had about a year in between the DC production, which was last year, and then this production here at the Met, and where we really kind of went back into the weeds and looked at every word and every note. And re-examined it, and that's when we had the ending, which was closer to the play's ending in DC, and as Jeanine said, it was a pretty heavy. Yes, everybody was definitely part of under her microscope at the end, and as far as culpability and as far as it was pretty heavy. And yeah, so one of the things we thought about was the ending and a gentle shift there, which, I don't know, for some reason, like once you suggested it, I had like a split second of like, oh, and then like right after that, it just seemed very natural. I think I even told you that at the time. And then everybody I told my wife Laura, and she's like, oh yeah, sure. And then I told my dad, he's like, oh yeah, okay. And I'm like, oh, I thought, there's no one going to, yeah. It just seemed like this very natural solution to our, the way we might be able to sneak a little hope in there. And then we also had a thought of putting in a framing device of some kind, just to kind of let people know where things are headed in general over the course of the evening. So this is not much of a spoiler, because you will find in the first second the opera starts that Jess walks across the stage and she's in prison, in a prison uniform, being led to her cell. And then the opera proper starts. She looks out at us, and we're to take that it's her memories in that moment that we're then watching the rest of the opera.
You said something so smart when we were talking about this, because I had this really terrible idea, which you also were like, maybe, I won't even go into it because you'll think less of me. No, it's so terrible. In the lobby, we'll talk about it. But George said, when we were talking about this way, you said, that way we'll start with a question. And I was like, oh, that's such a smart, you start with tension, as opposed to, here we are. It was like, there's something you don't quite know. And I really love that idea.
You know, if I can speak sort of as an audience member, for me, when we did Grounded here in 2015, it was the Obama years. And it was under Obama that the drone programs were really taking off. And as we sat in this theater, we couldn't imagine that Donald Trump was going to be elected. And that last speech that she made to us was basically, to me, it was saying, you cannot be complacent. You cannot think that you aren't implicated in every death in the Mideast. Those, because that's the illusion of the chair force, as they call it, that somehow it's clinical and surgical and doesn't involve us, but it involves us more than ever. And I felt it wasn't so much a bummer as a bracing, an urgent now for the languid will, as Jonathan Edwards would say. It was basically trying to wake us out of our complacency. Now, we have been awoken from our complacency. We are facing a terrifying future, and it does feel like we are not hiding from how awful things are. We are desperate to believe that our actions can matter and find a way out of it. And that's why to me, separate from the form of opera or play, the ending feels like I want to embrace it now in a different way than I did back then.
Would add to that, though, I think what's very different is when you have a storyteller who gathers you and says, and then this happened, and I thought this, and it looked like this, and then the audience actually sees dancers' bodies slipping and sliding as she talks about them being blown to bits, and their torsos ripped in half, chunks of bone. And so I think that experience of having and hearing some of the orchestral sounds, they experience it also, that it became part of it that they have all evening, and I don't know if that's true, but it just felt like, and having that at the end, And I think bracing is the perfect word for it. It required something else. Something else had to happen there that was also not replacing it, but was something we are bringing the fader upon at the end to listen to the way that she's feeling inside that she can sing about, as opposed to address us. She was actually addressing someone else.
Oh my gosh, which I can't wait to experience myself, because I haven't yet, but I will get to on this coming Monday night when the Met season opens with Grounded. And I assume if you're not there Monday night, you'll be there in the course of the run to this extraordinary piece. I'm going to say a few thank yous, and then don't worry, I'm not the last thing you'll hear. We get one more extraordinary excerpt from these artists. I want to thank the Metropolitan Opera for partnering with us. It's just such a great honor. Arguably the premier performing arts institution in the world, and particularly the aforementioned Paul Cremo, Melanie Milton, for making all of this possible. Thank you. Jeanine and George, extraordinary artists who I've been so lucky to work with for so long, and I hope I do till I'm in the grave. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. These amazing, amazing artists. I just have to do a particular shout out for Merritt Jansen, a brilliant, brilliant actress whose art form perhaps has been slightly underpraised tonight, but we're incredibly grateful, Merritt, for your extraordinary work. Emily Van Ben Bliss, Ellie Dan, and pianist Taylor Van Fluent. Grounded opens the next opera season on Monday evening, and this is one last excerpt with Jess, Eric, and also Jess, I Am Above Me, from Act 2, Scene 28.